Part 14. Going and coming, beckoning, signaling, so the light and shadow which now made the wall grey, now the bananas bright yellow, now made the Strand grey, now made the omnibuses bright yellow. So the light seemed to Septimus Warren Smith lying on the sofa in the sitting room, watching the watery gold glow and fade with the astonishing sensibility of some live creature on the roses, on the wallpaper. Outside, the trees dragged their leaves like nets through the depths of the air. The sound of water was in the room, and through the waves came the voices of birds singing. Every power poured its treasures on his head, and his hand lay there on the back of the sofa, as he had seen his hand lie when he was bathing, floating on the top of the waves, while far away on shore he heard dogs barking and barking, far away. Fear no more, says the heart in the body, fear no more. He was not afraid. At every moment nature signified by some laughing hint, like that gold spot which went round the wall, there, 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 her determination to show by brandishing her plumes, shaking her tresses, flinging her mantle this way and that, beautifully, always beautifully, and standing close up to breathe through her hollowed hands Shakespeare's words, her meaning. Retsia, sitting at the table, twisting a hat in her hands, watched him, saw him smiling. He was happy then. But she could not bear to see him smiling. It was not marriage, it was not being one's husband to look strange like that, always to be starting, laughing, sitting hour after hour silent, or clutching her and telling her to write. The table drawer was full of those writings, about war, about Shakespeare, about great discoveries, how there is no death. Lately he had become excited suddenly for no reason, and both Dr. Holmes and Sir William Bradshaw said excitement was the worst thing for him, and waved his hands and cried out that he knew the truth, he knew everything. That man, his friend who was killed, Evans, had come, he said. He was singing behind the screen. She wrote it down just as he spoke it. Some things were very beautiful, others sheer nonsense, and he was always stopping in the middle, changing his mind, wanting to add something, hearing something new, listening with his hand up. But she heard nothing. And once they found the girl who did the room reading one of these papers in fits of laughter. It was a dreadful pity, for that made Septimus cry out about human cruelty, how they tear each other to pieces. The fallen, he said, they tear to pieces. Holmes is on us, he would say, and he would invent stories about Holmes. Holmes eating porridge, Holmes reading Shakespeare, making himself roar with laughter or rage, for Dr. Holmes seemed to stand for something horrible to him. Human nature, he called him. Then there were the visions. He was drowned, he used to say, and laying on a cliff with the gulls screaming over him. He would look over the edge of the sofa down into the sea. Or he was hearing music. Really, it was only a barrel organ or some man crying in the street. But lovely, he used to cry, and the tears would run down his cheeks, which was to her the most dreadful thing of all, to see a man like Septimus, who had fought, who was brave, crying. And he would lie listening until suddenly he would cry that he was falling down, down into the flames. Actually, she would look for flames, it was so vivid, but there was nothing. They were alone in the room. It was a dream, she would tell him, and so quiet him at last, but sometimes she was frightened, too. She sighed as she sat sewing. Her sigh was tender and enchanting, like the wind outside a wood in the evening. Now she put down her scissors. Now she turned to take something from the table. A little stir, a little crinkling, a little tapping built up something on the table there where she sat sewing. Through his eyelashes he could see her blurred outline, her little black body, her face and hands, her turning movements at the table as she took up a reel, or looked, as she was apt to lose things, for her silk. She was making a hat for Mrs. Filmer's married daughter, whose name was... He had forgotten her name. What was the name of Mrs. Filmer's married daughter? He asked. Mrs. Peters, said Retsia. She was afraid it was too small, she said, holding it before her. Mrs. Peters was a big woman, but she did not like her. It was only because Mrs. Filmer had been so good to them. She gave me grapes this morning, she said. That Retsia wanted to do something to show that they were grateful. She had come into the room the other evening and found Mrs. Peters, who thought they were out, playing the gramophone. Was it true, he asked? She was playing the gramophone? Yes, she had told him about it at the time. She had found Mrs. Peters playing the gramophone. He began, very cautiously, to open his eyes, to see whether a gramophone was really there. But real things were too exciting. He must be cautious. He would not go mad. First he looked at the fashion papers on the lower shelf, then, gradually, at the gramophone with the green trumpet. Nothing could be more exact. And so, gathering courage, he looked at the sideboard, the plate of bananas, the engraving of Queen Victoria and the Prince Consort, at the mantelpiece with the jar of roses. None of these things moved. All were still. All were real. She is a woman with a spiteful tongue, said Retsia. What does Mr. Peters do? Septimus asked. Ah, said Retsia, trying to remember. She thought Mrs. Filmer had said that he travelled for some company. Just now he is in Hull, she said. Just now. She said that with her Italian accent. She said that herself. He shaded his eyes so that he might see only a little of her face at a time, first the chin, then the nose, then the forehead, in case it were deformed or had some terrible mark on it. But no, there she was, perfectly natural, sewing, with the pursed lips that women have, the set, the melancholy expression, when sewing. But there was nothing terrible about it, he assured himself, looking a second time, a third time at her face, her hands, for what was frightening or disgusting in her as she sat there in broad daylight, sewing? Mrs. Peters had a spiteful tongue. Mr. Peters was in Hull. Why then rage and prophecy? Why fly scourged and outcast? Why be made to tremble and sob by the clouds? Why seek truths and deliver messages when Retsia sat sticking pins into the front of her dress and Mr. Peters was in Hull? Miracles, revelations, agonies, loneliness, falling through the sea, down, down into the flames, all were burnt out, for he had a sense, as he watched Retsia trimming the straw hat for Mrs. Peters, of a coverlet of flowers. It's too small for Mrs. Peters, said Septimus. For the first time for days he was speaking as he used to do. Of course it was, absurdly small, she said, but Mrs. Peters had chosen it. He took it out of her hands. He said it was an organ grinder's monkey's hat. How it rejoiced her that! Not for weeks had they laughed like this together, poking fun privately like married people. What she meant was that if Mrs. Filmer had come in, or Mrs. Peters, or anybody, they would not have understood what she and Septimus were laughing at. There, she said, pinning a rose to one side of the hat. Never had she felt so happy, never in her life. But that was still more ridiculous, Septimus said. Now the poor woman looked like a pig at a fair. Nobody ever made her laugh as Septimus did. What had she got in her work-box? She had ribbons and beads, tassels, artificial flowers. She tumbled them out on the table. He began putting odd colors together, for though he had no fingers, could not even do up a parcel, he had a wonderful eye, and often he was right, sometimes absurd, of course, but sometimes wonderfully right. "She shall have a beautiful hat," he murmured, taking up this and that, Retsia kneeling by his side, looking over his shoulder. Now it was finished. That is to say, the design. She must stitch it together, but she must be very, very careful, he said, to keep it just as he had made it. So she sewed. When she sewed, he thought, she made a sound like a kettle on the hob, bubbling, murmuring, always busy, her strong little pointed fingers pinching and poking, her needle flashing straight. The sun might go in and out on the tassels, on the wall-paper, but he would wait, he thought, stretching out his feet, looking at his ringed sock at the end of the sofa. He would wait in this warm place, this pocket of still air, which one comes on at the edge of a wood sometimes in the evening, when, because of a fall in the ground, or some arrangement of the trees, one must be scientific, above all scientific. Warmth lingers, and the air buffets the cheek like the wing of a bird. "There it is," said Retsia, twirling Mrs. Peters's hat on the tips of her fingers. "That'll do for the moment. Later—" Her sentence bubbled away, drip, 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 like a contented tap left running. It was wonderful. Never had he done anything which made him feel so proud. It was so real. It was so substantial, Mrs. Peters's hat. "Just look at it," he said. Yes, it would always make her happy to see that hat. He had become himself then. He had laughed then. They had been alone together. Always she would like that hat. He told her to try it on. "But I must look so queer," she cried, running over to the glass and looking first this side, then that. Then she snatched it off again, for there was a tap at the door. Could it be Sir William Bradshaw? Had he sent already? No, it was only a small girl with the evening paper. What always happened then happened. What happened every night of their lives. The small girl sucked her thumb at the door. Retsia went down on her knees. Retsia cooed and kissed. Retsia got a bag of sweets out of the table drawer. For so it always happened. First one thing, then another. So she built it up, first one thing and then another. Dancing, skipping, round and round the room they went. He took the paper. Surrey was all out, he read. There was a heat wave. Retsia repeated, Surrey was all out. There was a heat wave, making it part of the game she was playing with Mrs. Filmer's grandchild, both of them laughing, chattering at the same time, at their game. He was very tired. He was very happy. He would sleep. He shut his eyes. But directly he saw nothing. The sounds of the game became fainter and stranger, and sounded like the cries of people seeking and not finding, and passing further and further away. They had lost him. He started up in terror. What did he see? The plate of bananas on the sideboard. Nobody was there. Retsia had taken the child to its mother. It was bedtime. That was it. To be alone forever. That was the doom pronounced in Milan when he came into the room and saw them cutting out buckram shapes with their scissors. To be alone forever. He was alone with the sideboard and the bananas. He was alone, exposed on this bleak eminence, stretched out. but not on a hilltop, not on a crag, on Mrs. Filmer's sitting-room sofa. As for the visions, the faces, the voices of the dead, where were they? There was a screen in front of him with black bulrushes and blue swallows, where he had once seen mountains, where he had seen faces, where he had seen beauty. There was a screen. "Evans!" he cried. There was no answer. A mouse had squeaked, or a curtain rustled. Those were the voices of the dead. The screen, the coal scuttle, the sideboard remained to him. Let him then face the screen, the coal scuttle, and the sideboard. But Retsia burst into the room, chattering. Some letter had come. Everybody's plans were changed. Mrs. Filmer would not be able to go to Brighton after all. There was no time to let Mrs. Williams know, and really Retsia thought it very, very annoying when she caught sight of the hat, and thought, perhaps, she might just make a little... Her voice died out in contented melody. "Ah, damn!" she cried. It was a joke of theirs, her swearing. The needle had broken. Hat, child, Brighton, needle. She built it up. First one thing, then another. She built it up, sewing. She wanted him to say whether by moving the rose she had improved the hat. She sat on the end of the sofa. They were perfectly happy now, she said suddenly, putting the hat down, for she could say anything to him now. She could say whatever came into her head. That was almost the first thing she had felt about him that night in the cafe when he had come in with his English friends. He had come in rather shyly, looking round him, and his hat had fallen when he hung it up. That she could remember. She knew he was English, though not one of the large Englishmen her sister admired, for he was always thin, but he had a beautiful fresh colour, and with his big nose, his bright eyes, his way of sitting a little hunched, made her think, she had often told him, of a young hawk that first evening she saw him when they were playing dominoes and he had come in, of a young hawk. But with her he was always very gentle. She had never seen him wild or drunk, only suffering sometimes through this terrible war, but even so, when she came in he would put it all away. Anything in the whole world, any little bother with her work, anything that struck her to say, she would tell him, and he understood at once. Her own family even were not the same. Being older than she was, and being so clever, how serious he was, wanting her to read Shakespeare before she could even read a child's story in English. Being so much more experienced, he could help her, and she too could help him. But this hat now, and then, it was getting late, Sir William Bradshaw. She held her hands to her head, waiting for him to say did he like the hat or not, and as she sat there, waiting, looking down, he could feel her mind like a bird, falling from branch to branch, and always alighting quite rightly. He could follow her mind as she sat there in one of those loose, lax poses that came to her naturally, and if he should say anything, at once she smiled, like a bird alighting with all its claws firm upon the bough. But he remembered Bradshaw said, "The people we are most fond of are not good for us when we are ill." Bradshaw said he must be taught to rest. Bradshaw said they must be separated. Must, must. Why must? What power had Bradshaw over him? What right has Bradshaw to say must to me? He demanded. "It is because you talked of killing yourself," said Retsia. Mercifully she could now say anything to Septimus. So he was in their power. Holmes and Bradshaw were on him. The brute with the red nostrils was snuffing into every secret place. Must, it could say. Where were his papers, the things he had written? She brought him his papers, the things he had written, things she had written for him. She tumbled them out onto the sofa. They looked at them together. Diagrams, designs, little men and women brandishing sticks for arms, with wings, were they? On their backs. Circles traced round shillings and sixpences, the suns and stars, zigzagging precipices with mountaineers ascending roped together, exactly like knives and forks. Sea pieces with little faces laughing out of what might perhaps be waves, the map of the world. "Burn them," he cried. Now for his writings, how the dead sing behind rhododendron bushes, odes to time, conversations with Shakespeare, Evans, 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 his messages from the dead. Do not cut down trees. Tell the Prime Minister. Universal love, the meaning of the world. Burn them, he cried. But Retzia laid her hands on them. Some were very beautiful, she thought. She would tie them up, for she had no envelope, with a piece of silk. Even if they took him, she said, she would go with him. They could not separate them against their wills, she said. Shuffling the edges straight, she did up the papers and tied the parcel almost without looking, sitting beside him, he thought, as if all her petals were about her. She was a flowering tree, and through her branches looked out the face of a lawgiver who had reached a sanctuary where she feared no one, not Holmes, not Bradshaw, a miracle, a triumph, the last and greatest. Staggering, he saw her mount the appalling staircase laden with Holmes and Bradshaw, men who never weighed less than 11 stone 6, who sent their wives to court, men who made 10,000 a year and talked of proportion, who, different in their verdicts, for Holmes said one thing, Bradshaw another, yet judges they were, who mixed the vision and the sideboard, saw nothing clear, yet ruled, yet inflicted. Must, they said. Over them she triumphed. There, she said. The papers were tied up. No one should get at them. She would put them away. And, she said, nothing should separate them. She sat down beside him and called him by the name of that hawk or crow which, being malicious and a great destroyer of crops, was precisely like him. No one could separate them, she said. Then she got up to go into the bedroom to pack their things, but hearing voices downstairs and thinking that Dr. Holmes had perhaps called, ran down to prevent him coming up. Septimus could hear her talking to Holmes on the staircase. "My dear lady, I have come as a friend," Holmes was saying. "No, I will not allow you to see my husband," she said. He could see her like a little hen with her wings spread, barring his passage, but Holmes persevered. "My dear lady, allow me," Holmes said, putting her aside. Holmes was a powerfully built man. Holmes was coming upstairs. Holmes would burst upon the door. Holmes would say, "In a funk, eh?" Holmes would get him. But no, not Holmes, not Bradshaw. Getting up rather unsteadily, hopping indeed from foot to foot, he considered Mrs. Filmer's nice clean bread knife, with bread carved on the handle. Ah, but one mustn't spoil that. The gas fire? But it was too late now. Holmes was coming. Razors he might have got, but Retzia, who always did that sort of thing, had packed them. There remained only the window, the large Bloomsbury lodging-house window, the tiresome, the troublesome, the rather melodramatic business of opening the window and throwing himself out. It was their idea of tragedy, not his or Retzia's, for she was with him. Holmes and Bradshaw liked that sort of thing. He sat on the sill. But he would wait till the very last moment. He did not want to die. Life was good, the sun hot, only human beings. What did they want? Coming down the staircase opposite, an old man stopped and stared at him. Holmes was at the door. "I'll give it you!" he cried, and flung himself vigorously, violently down onto Mrs. Filmer's area railings. "The coward!" cried Dr. Holmes, bursting the door open. Retsia ran to the window. She saw. She understood. Dr. Holmes and Mrs. Filmer collided with each other. Mrs. Filmer flapped her apron and made her hide her eyes in the bedroom. There was a great deal of running up and down stairs. Dr. Holmes came in, white as a sheet, shaking all over, with a glass in his hand. She must be brave and drink something, he said. What was it? Something sweet? For her husband was horribly mangled, would not recover consciousness. She must not see him, must be spared as much as possible, would have the inquest to go through, poor young woman. Who could have foretold it? A sudden impulse. No one was in the least to blame, he told Mrs. Filmer. And why the devil he did it, Dr. Holmes could not conceive. It seemed to her as she drank the sweet stuff that she was opening long windows, stepping out into some garden. But where? The clock was striking. 1, 2, 3. How sensible the sound was, compared with all this thumping and whispering, like Septimus himself. She was falling asleep, but the clock went on striking. 4, 5, 6, and Mrs. Filmer waving her apron. They wouldn't bring the body in here, would they? Seemed part of that garden. Or a flag. She had once seen a flag slowly rippling out from a mast when she stayed with her aunt at Venice. Men killed in battle were thus saluted, and Septimus had been through the war. Of her memories most were happy. She put on her hat and ran through cornfields. Where could it have been? On to some hill, somewhere near the sea, for there were ships, gulls, butterflies. They sat on a cliff. In London, too, there they sat, and, half dreaming, came to her through the bedroom door, rain falling, whisperings, stirrings among dry corn, the caress of the sea, as it seemed to her, hollowing them in its arched shell and murmuring to her laid on shore, strewn, she felt, like flying flowers over some tomb. "He is dead," she said, smiling at the poor old woman who guarded her, with her honest light blue eyes fixed on the door. They wouldn't bring him in here, would they? But Mrs. Filmer pooh-poohed. Oh no, oh no, they were carrying him away now. Ought she not to be told? Married people ought to be together, Mrs. Filmer thought. But they must do as the doctor said. "Let her sleep," said Dr. Holmes, feeling her pulse. She saw the large outline of his body standing dark against the window. So that was Dr. Holmes.